In this video today, I'm going to walk you through step by step how I used some scrap acrylic to make this custom deck recess. I'll show you some tips for building the mold. I'll show you how I shoot my gel coat, some tips for mold prep, laying down the skin layer and the main layers. We'll talk about some materials and peel ply, and then we'll pop the final part out of the mold and deliver it to the customer. What's up guys, Russ from Boat Crafter. So I'm going to make a video real quick today showing you how I'm going to make a mold, a fiberglass mold using pieces of scrap acrylic. And the piece I'm making a mold for is this deck drain. So a customer brought this to me and he's dropping this into the floor of a skiff, a Maverick or a Hughes. I think it's a Hughes. But anyways, this is going to get dropped into the floor. The problem was he had this installed previously, but the drain sat on top of the deck. So because this has about a 1/4 inch lip on it, the water obviously wasn't going into the drain. It was just kind of like, it would go in there obviously if there was a lot of water, but then he would get a lot of standing water. So we're going to recess this down into the deck about a 1/4 inch. So I'm going to make a really quick mold using scrap acrylic. So I already cut these pieces on my laser machine. I'm not going to go through that. What I did was I took and drew this shape on my computer and then cut this piece of acrylic on the laser machine. So it's a little bit bigger than the diameter of this drain piece, so that after the mold is complete, which you'll see a little bit later on, this is going to drop down flush. So we're going to make a really simple, quick mold. So you might be asking yourself, why am I using acrylic to make this mold? And if I didn't have the laser machine, this would probably be a little bit more difficult. I guess it depends on the shape of what it is that you need to make a mold of. But acrylic is nice to make short run molds for, because it has a perfectly smooth, glossy surface. And I don't have to do anything to it to have the piece come out of the mold virtually flawless and virtually perfect. If I was to do this same thing using MDF, I'd have to shoot primer on the MDF and then sand the primer and make it smooth. To get to this level of smoothness and gloss with MDF would take some work. Now, you can make a mold out of MDF, and a lot of people will just shoot a bunch of coats of PVA on it, right on top of the MDF, and then pull a mold off of it. You can do that, but it won't be anywhere near this surface, you know, as smooth as the acrylic is what I'm trying to say. Now, it's a bit overkill because this is going to get installed into the boat anyways, so having a perfectly smooth piece to install is kind of irrelevant, because whoever is going to be doing the install is going to have to be doing some sanding and fairing anyways, and then it's going to get painted over. So making the part I'm going to be making out of the mold perfectly smooth is it's super overkill. However, I have a ton of scrap acrylic in my shop. It's easy to cut on my laser machine, and it's only going to take me a few minutes to make this mold, and then I can get right into making the part. So a couple of the things I'm going to need to get this accomplished is an adhesive. So we're going to have to glue this to this piece. So you could drill holes in it and screw it to the base piece. So the base piece is a 3/8 inch acrylic, and the top piece is 1/4 inch. So we just need to get this attached to this piece as easily as possible. I probably should drill holes and put some screws in it just to hold it down, but drilling and screwing acrylic, you do run the risk of it cracking. So I have some Super Bond epoxy adhesive. So this is a fast cure. So this will fully cure to sand in probably like 20 to 30 minutes. But it should bond pretty quickly, and it should glue this onto this piece relatively fast. I mean, probably in less than 20 minutes, this will be, glued to this really well. Sometimes if I'm doing something and I need the bond to be a little bit better, I will use ACRYLIC. This is an acrylic adhesive. This is a 1-to-1 mix, very similar to epoxy, but this has a much stronger bond than the epoxy does. Then we're going to need some wax. some mold wax, release wax, and microfiber, and we're going to need some fillet wax. So this is a non-drying modeling clay. So we're going to use this to make the radius so that the glass can roll over it nice and neat and clean. So the first thing I'm going to do is just mix up some epoxy. This is a 1-to-1 super bond. I use this for a lot if I need to bond things and I want it to cure really, really fast. So I'm going to get some gloves. All right, so before I mix that up, I don't want to forget that I'm going to sand underneath this a little bit so the acrylic, or so the glue has some teeth to bite into. So I just outlined where I want to keep the glue. I don't want to get glue on the outside of this. So I'm just going to keep the sanding to the inside. I just grabbed a little piece of 80 grit sandpaper. So I'm going to sand this really well on the inside. Doesn't have to be crazy here. Now, if you have a boat shop, it's possible you might have acrylic laying around. If you're a DIY person, acrylic's kind of expensive, and you might have to use something else. But this is a very nice way to make a part quickly and have the surface be really, really smooth. It might be necessary that you would want to do something like this. Like say you're making a piece for a dashboard, say you wanted to make a little recess for switches, all kinds of different stuff. Doesn't necessarily have to be a deck drain, but having a material like acrylic that's very, very smooth, it's going to give you a nice smooth finish. So a quick little tip, something I use quite often is ammonia-free glass cleaner. It's a nice solvent. I don't think there's any organic contaminants on this, but I'll just wipe it with the glass cleaner anyways. Glass cleaner is more or less alcohol and water in a spray can, but it works really good as a inexpensive, quick surface prep. All right, so we got that. Now we're going to mix up the Super Bond epoxy 1-to-1. Not going to need that much at all. Just going to put a little bit on there. Just wipe off that part A before I scoop into the part B. So we got one part A, one part B. I'm just going to mix that up real quick. So like I said, this is a fast cure. The weather in Florida right now, it's November, so it is cooling down. I don't know what the temperature is out today, probably in the mid-70s, maybe close to 80, but you know, compared to midsummer temperatures, if I was using this epoxy in the summer in here in the shop, this stuff cures super, 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 super fast. Just try to mix it up real good. One thing to note too, I think a lot of people think that epoxy is less toxic than polyester products, and I guess it's what you consider toxic. Epoxy has some ingredients in it that are probably cancer causing, so you want to make sure you're not touching your epoxy. I really should be wearing a mask right now, but I don't know if you can see, but we have a really strong breeze coming through the shop today because breeze is coming off the ocean and coming right through the shop and going out the back. So we got really good ventilation in here today. But I see so many people handling epoxy with their bare hands and not wearing respirators. Just because you can't smell it doesn't mean it's not toxic. All right, so we're just going to put a little bit of this on here. Probably should have mixed up a little bit more, but this will be enough to hold it. Don't need a lot, just enough to kind of coat most of the surface. Doesn't need to be fully coated. You could solvent weld this as well. So if I don't have any acetone in the shop, but acetone, if I put some acetone on the top of this and then put this on the top of it and just let it sit, the acetone is going to melt the acrylic, both pieces, and then it's going to solvent weld these two pieces together. Now you can do that as well. In my experience, it takes a little bit longer for the acetone to evaporate and for it to cure to where, you know, it makes a strong bond. But you could do that to bond these two pieces together. So I'm just going to put this on here. Put a little pressure on it. I don't want to push it down too much because I don't want it to squish out the sides. And then we're just going to let it sit for a little bit, and then we'll come back and keep going. All right, so we're back. The glue hasn't fully cured yet, but it's bonded well enough to move on to the next step. So now I'm going to use some of the modeling clay. So it's pretty warm. Obviously, it's always warm in Florida, but if you're in a colder climate, this can get kind of, you know, not as pliable like that. So a little bit of heat. You have a heat gun, you can heat it up real quick and it'll make it easier to work with. So we're just going to take some of this and we're going to work it into the corner between the bottom piece and the top piece, and we're just going to be creating a radius for the glass to roll around, because glass doesn't like to go on 90-degree angles. So whenever you're doing a mold, you need to make sure that you have a radius for it to, the glass to ride on. So we're just gonna kind of being careful not to push the piece because it's not fully cured yet. So I'm gonna have to add more than this. I should have, in hindsight, I should have put a small radius on the top of this piece of acrylic, and that would make it easier for the glass to go up like that. But since we're going to be cutting out the middle of this anyways, I'm just going to build up the radius putty so that it comes almost all the way up to the top, and it should be fine. When I build the mold, I'm going to show you a trick on how I kind of get my glass into a tight radius like this, but that's going to be a little bit later in this video. Or just working this in with your finger. So you don't necessarily need a tool like this, but I have a bunch of these. This is a cake decorating tool. So I have a bunch of them with different size stainless balls on each side. So depending on the size of the radius that I want to make, I have ones that are bigger and smaller. I think I'm going to use the bigger one on here. And then I'm just going to drag this along. It's not enough. I don't have enough of this stuff on there for this to work. So put a little bit extra. There we go. And so you can see how the radius tool puts a nice transition between the bottom piece and the top piece, and that piece is going to come out in the mold. So you want to make sure that we get this nice and straight and clean, no lumps, no creases, no anything, because any of that is going to get picked up in the gel coat. And just keep going around, putting a little bit more on here. So you don't want to, with this tool, see it's already picking up and lifting the stuff out. So what I'm going to do is get some naphtha. So this is VM&P naphtha. This is a petroleum-based solvent. Pretty toxic, crazy stuff. You don't want to touch it. So I'm just going to soak my pendant tool in the naphtha. It should help it slide a little easier. We're going to go back and clean this up with the naphtha after I get it all in place. So this can be kind of tedious because, you know, as you move the radius tool around, it's just going to keep wanting to pick up and move. So you got to kind of go slow with it. See how I'm going back and forth, just trying to do it in small little stages. But the naphtha on the tool helps it not make it bunch and clump up. It probably doesn't help that this cake tool has a little bit of rust on the end of it. So about a year ago, maybe more than a year ago, a year and a half ago, I noticed that in my shop, all my tools were rusted. Like everything in my shop was rusty, and I could not figure out why it was doing that. And come to find out, is because I had a can of muriatic acid in the shop, in the corner. And even though it was sealed, the muriatic acid was still leaching out of the cap into the air in my shop, and it caused everything in my shop to get rusted. Like anything that wasn't stainless steel, like high quality stainless, it got rusted. And still a lot of my tools, like this is even supposed to be stainless and it rusted. I'm sure it's like a low grade stainless. So if you have muriatic acid in your shop, get rid of it and put it somewhere else. All right, I'm trying to get crazy with this and make it perfect, but with the naphtha on it, it works really, really good. But when it dries out, it doesn't move as fast. Or move as smooth, I guess. I don't know why I said fast. All right, let's see how that works. I'm getting old, so I have to take my glasses off when I'm doing close-up work because I can't see. But then if I look up, I can't see 10 feet. If you were standing right here in the shop, I probably wouldn't be able to tell who it was. All right, so now I'm just going to take a little bit of the naphtha and I'm going to go around and clean it up. So I found that the naphtha works really good on this this radius putty material for just cleaning it up without like really removing a lot of it. So I use it a lot when I'm doing this on molds, because you can already see how it cleaned up the edge of this putty really nice. Putty, I keep calling it putty, it's modeling clay. So this is, I believe it's plastilina. This is an art supply. I get this off Amazon. This was a huge chunk, like a block like this. But they have this at marine supply places as well. It's probably a little bit different and more expensive, but this stuff is what you need. You want the non-hardening, and you can reuse it. So after I was done with this, I could always scrape this off and put it back in into the chunk and reuse it. So this is looking pretty good right now. Just clean up any of the excess. So another tip, I guess, if try to throw in tips as I can. The naphtha works really good. I use the naphtha for cleaning my molds as well. So if my mold has been sitting around the shop for a while, I'll use it and it won't remove the wax. I always re-wax anyways if I clean it with naphtha, but it doesn't remove it really aggressively. But naphtha works really good on removing adhesives like tape residue, and it also works really good like for cleaning caulk lines. So some boats have you know, a large lid for the gas tank. You know, other things are caulked along the bottom of the console, and the caulk gets moldy and dirty and collects dirt over time. Take a little bit of naphtha on a rag and then wipe the caulk. It'll clean the caulk and make it white again. I find that it works really good for that. But you want to wear gloves. You don't want to get this on your hands. It burns like crazy. I mean, it's almost like gasoline, but I think it's worse than gasoline. All right, I'm getting a little crazy right now, so it doesn't need to be perfect. All right, so there we go. You can see that nice, clean, consistent radius along the outside. So this is going to be the shape of the recess. And then this is going to drop down like that. Well, it seems like the epoxy is cured up quite a bit, so I think we're safe to put the wax on. So what we're going to do is take some, I like this honey wax. I've used some other ones like the Part All mold release wax, which is green. I've used that before, and I don't really like it as much as this. This seems to be my go-to over the past couple of years. So I'm just going to wax this up. You don't have to get crazy because the acrylic, someone's calling me. All right, little pit stop there for a phone call. So just gonna, don't have to put a lot of wax on this because the surface of the acrylic is so smooth by itself that, you know, the polyester resin isn't gonna like to stick to it too well, but it will. I've put polyester on straight glass and it's stuck, like really stuck. I was surprised. So we're just gonna get, don't have to worry about waxing the modeling clay as much, but we're just trying to get a good coat of wax on the acrylic. Just let it haze up a little bit and then we'll polish it. Do another coat. I mean, most people are going to say 5 or 6 coats of wax, polished, but because we're on such a smooth surface, like 2 to 3 is more than enough. So it hazes up real quick. You can kind of see it haze, so you know it's dry. And then we'll just come back and just lightly polish it up. All right, I think that's going to be good enough. You know, I'm just going to add a little bit more. Just hate to have it get stuck on the mold. That would suck. But because this is such a small mold, and it's just a small piece we're making, shouldn't have any issues with it sticking. All right, hazed up, and just polish it off. All right, there we go. All waxed up, nice and smooth. When I was waxing, it did leave a couple marks in the clay, but it's going to be fine. We will see some of those small marks because the gel coat's going to fill that in, but like I said, this is getting sanded and reprimered and repainted after it's installed. So the next step is going to be putting gel coat, but first I just want to tape the edges up. I'm just going to put some tape on the edges, and the reason I'm going to do that, usually on molds I do it because just to keep the molds clean, but it also helps when you go to release the part. If your glass isn't overhanging the edge, it can be difficult to get your mold release tool underneath the glass. So having the tape there, we'll kind of be able to use the tape to get underneath the glass with the plastic, the mold release wedge. And then I'm just going to put a little wax on the tape so the resin doesn't stick to the tape. It's probably going to get trimmed inside the tape line anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But all right, we're going to get this ready to gel coat. I'm going to spray this with my dump gun, but you can, if you don't have a dump gun or you don't have a paint gun with a large tip to spray gel coat, I have a 2.5 millimeter tip that I could spray, but I'm just going to use my dump gun. Just put a little bit in the cup. You can brush it. If I was going to be brushing gel coat, you're going to need a couple coats in order for it to build. When you're brushing, it's hard to build thickness because every time you brush, you're removing it as you drag the brush across the surface, so you're going to get very, very thin. Unless you goop it on there like super, super heavy, which I wouldn't suggest doing that either, because as the gel coat starts to cure, the gel coat itself could pre-release. So if the gel coat gets too hot when it's sitting on the surface of the mold, as it cures, it's because it has the mold release wax already on it, and it gets hot, the gel coat's just gonna create, I mean, it could just bubble up, it could lift off completely, usually what'll happen is you'll get hot spots in the gel coat, and you'll get an area where it just lifts up. So then if that happens, you're pretty much screwed, because if you go to lay glass over the top of it where it's lifted, you're gonna have a bump in your part. If it happens in this area on this part, it's not a big deal. I mean, really, we only want this small part of the final finished piece. So the chances of that happening are pretty slim. But I think a lot of amateurs, because they're not getting good coverage with when they're brushing gel coat on, they just put more and more and more gel coat trying to build, and then it gets hot when it cures and it pre-releases, and that's a hot mess. So if you were going to brush gel coat on this, and I mean, a lot of people do it, what you would do is put a coat on, wait until it gets to the point where it's tacky, but it's not really showing on your finger, and put another light coat on, do it again, wait till it gets tacky. You don't want it to fully cure. Do like 3 coats, and you're gonna wanna build up to about 25 mil thickness. If you have a mil gauge, you can kind of measure, but if you're brushing, you're gonna get a lot of lumps and uneven spots. So I'm gonna show you how I'll spray this with my dump gun. All right, so I'm in my lamination room right now. It's just a mess because I got something sticky on my arm. Just a mess because I'm just always doing fiberglass work in here. So I'm not gonna need a lot of gel coat for this. Probably gonna do 8 to 12 ounces. I bet probably would be more than enough. Yep. Yeah, I think 8 ounces is going to be too much, but we'll mix it up anyways. So I like to thin out my gel coat when I'm shooting them on molds with a little bit of lacquer thinner. I mean, I guess you can use acetone, but lacquer thinner I've been using for years, and it works fine for me. Just helps it come out of the dump gun a little smoother. Just a little bit of lacquer thinner. I'm gonna turn the air conditioning on so it cools down in here a little bit. So if you're not familiar with a dump gun, this is a dump gun. This cup is gonna go right on the top of this gun, and it's got a very large tip. This is one of the largest tips that you can get. This tip is actually designed for using this gun for doing sandblasting. You can do sandblasting with this. I was using the smaller tip for a while, and it just it didn't flow out as good unless I really thinned it out a lot, which, you know, I don't really like doing that either. So I went to a larger size tip. I think this is, I should probably measure it. I'll measure it and put it up here, but I think it's 8 millimeter. I'm not 100% sure. So I'm just gonna get, I'm not gonna be able to talk, well, I'm gonna try to talk. I've never tried to talk with my spray suit on and my respirator, so I'm gonna go put that on and come right back. All right, so I got my full suit on with my fresh air system, and I got the microphone here underneath, so I'm not really sure how well the audio is gonna pick up when I'm talking. We'll see. I'm going to catalyze this a little bit hot because I'm trying to make this part today. I need to turn on my respirator. Customer wanted me to make this part for him today, but I have some stuff I have to ship out that has to get to UPS today before 6, so this might have to get set aside till tomorrow, but we'll see. So I'm going to catalyze. Just kind of winging it. I'd say it's probably about a little more than 2%. So this is Gelcoat with no wax in it. I'm sure that I don't need to say that. You never want to buy Gelcoat that has wax in it. I never really use wax at all if I can help it. Just use PVA to cure the Gelcoat. But we're not doing that. That's a different process. I don't want to confuse anybody. So there's no wax. This is just regular exterior Gelcoat. All right, so dump gun has a catalyzed Gelcoat in it, and just gonna hook it up to the air and lay it down. So with the dump gun, it has to be pointed down. You can't shoot upwards, and you want to make sure that as you flip it over, you have the trigger already pulled, because if you don't, when you tip the dump gun on, the Gelcoat's just going to run out. It's just going to run out of the gun. So I'm going to pull the trigger with it pointed up, and then move it down onto the piece. Yeah, I used about half of that. I don't want to put too much on there, and that's a pretty good coat of Gelcoat. I could do more, but again, I run the risk because I mixed it a little bit hot with the catalyst. I run the risk of it pre-releasing, so I don't want to push it. That's enough. I'd have to guess there's probably 15 to 20 mils on there, just from knowing how it flows out of the gun. I hate wasting material, but it's better to have too much in the gun than not enough. So another tip is I use this gun to clean out like my paint guns and my dump gun. So you need to get the Gelcoat out of the tip here. So this is pressurized. So I just fill this up with lacquer thinner and then pressurize it with the air compressor. And then I use this to spray out the nozzle of the gun, the paint gun. Oops. Of course, it's empty. Can't see if there's any in there. There's a little bit in there. Come on, baby, just a little bit more. Yeah, it's not coming out very well. The nice things about the dump gun, I gotta put the mask down. The nice thing about the dump gun is cleaning it takes literally 2 seconds. So this is the only piece that you need to clean. Just clean this off and then make sure you get the Gelcoat out of the inside of the tip. So I'm just trying to get the bristles down inside the tip to get the Gelcoat out. All right, that's it. You don't really have to clean anything on this. You do get some buildup on the front of this after a while, but and there's some rubber seals in here that get dried out, so I have to rebuild this like every couple of months. These are cheap. These are less than $100. Yeah. I use this every single day. I try to conserve supplies as long as I can. Like my paint sticks, just wipe them off, and you can use them a bunch of times. These cups, I usually use them like twice. So because there was already solvent in the cup from cleaning the dump gun, got the hiccups. I just clean this out real quick, and then I'll be able to use it for the next job. All right, so good coat of Gelcoat on the mold. I'm just gonna let it sit for a while. So I have the air conditioning running. I'm gonna let the air conditioning run for like 30 minutes or so, because I don't want it to get too hot in here, and then I'll have the pre-release problem that I was talking about. So I'll let the air conditioning run, and then as it starts to cure, then I'll turn the air conditioning off, and that will accelerate the cure, and that will get it to full cure. Okay, it's the next morning, so I shot the Gelcoat on this, let it sit overnight. You don't necessarily need to let the Gelcoat sit overnight. I do tend to do that pretty consistently, because usually I'll shoot my molds. One of the last things that I do during the day, let it sit overnight, and then come in and the next night it's all nice and cured up. One precaution is if you lay your Gelcoat and then you try to put your resin over the top of the Gelcoat too soon, what's going to happen is the styrene in the resin is going to dissolve the Gelcoat, and that's when you're going to get alligation. So when you pull the part out of the mold, you'll see that the Gelcoat kind of dissolved from the resin, and you get what looks like alligator skin in your part. So to avoid that, you need to let the Gelcoat cure for a certain amount of time. So Gelcoat doesn't have any wax in it, and it doesn't fully cure. So this doesn't have tack in it, but you could still feel that it's a little sticky. So it's ready, but it's still sticky, but it's cured enough to where the styrenes in the resin aren't gonna affect it. So I got my supplies laid out. So the first part of this is I'm just gonna lay the skin layer. So I have 2 pieces of 3/4 ounce chop strand that I just cut big enough to fit over this. I have maybe like 6 ounces of resin in here, just enough to wet these out. That's probably more than enough for these 2 pieces. And what I'm going to do first is I'm going to use an isophthalic based putty. So isophthalic resin is kind of one step below vinyl ester. It has very low shrinkage. It cures very, very strong. I use this in my shop pretty much for doing all my radius work. So before I make a mold, I'm going to run putty along any tight radiuses, like a tight radius like this. And what that does is it kind of creates a ramp for the glass. So this edge is going to be mostly putty, and then the glass is going to go up over the top of it. So it would be a challenge. I mean, you can get it to lay flat, but it'll be a challenge to get the glass to go up and then lay flat on the top of this. But if we have the putty, it creates a ramp so the glass doesn't have to, it doesn't have to bend itself into weird shapes. And that's going to eliminate air pockets. One of the most annoying things with doing parts is when you get really, really tiny air pockets, and that happens because if you don't get the glass pushed into your mold perfect, you get little tiny air bubbles, and those can pop out, quickly or down the road. So you don't want to install this, and then, the first time you use the boat, somebody steps on it and it collapses the Gelcoat and you get a little air pocket. Now you have to fix that. So having air pockets, we want to try to avoid that. So this is an isophthalic putty. I sell this on my website. I go through gallons of this every month. So you can see it's a pre-mixed putty. It's got some reinforcements in it. I'm not exactly sure what's in it. It's kind of got like a sandy texture to it. So I use this for putting radius on the bottom of stringers. I use this for core bonding. So if I'm bonding foam into a mold, all kinds of stuff. Sometimes I use this for void filling. So like in my Donzi project, the floor was kind of uneven. So I would pull this over the floor just to fill in the low spots and then put glass over the top of it. This is not a fairing putty. This pretty much needs to be capped with glass. This won't cure dry enough to sand. I've tried to use this as a fairing putty by adding some wax to it. And it doesn't sand very well. So this is not something you would use to do, a direct fairing. You always would put glass over the top of this. So I have a little bit in my cup here, a very, very small amount. And in this cup here, I have a cake decorating bag. So I'm just going to use this cake decorating bag to create a piping bag. So I'm going to mix up the resin and I'm going to put it into this plastic bag, and I'm going to put a bead around the outside. You don't necessarily need to do this. I like using these because it's cleaner. It uses less material. What I could also do is mix this up and then just brush it into the radius. So you can skip this step, but I'm just going to show you how to mix this up and use the cake decorating bag for this process. So let me just get excess off the sides here. So I'm using red dyed MEKP. You probably should get used to using red MEKP for a few reasons. One is so you remember if you put catalyst in your resin or not, and the other is, as you start to do more and more fiberglass work, having the red dye in your resin and in your putty will give you an idea on what percentage catalyst you have, what mix it is. So I know with this putty that I want kind of like a light raspberry color. I'll show you here in a minute what it looks like. And then I know just from the color that the catalyst is good. If it's more gray, like the original color, then I'll add a little bit more just to be safe. So I'm going to mix this up real well. So the thing with mixing pre-mixed putties is unless you're going to get a scale out every single time and then measure out your catalyst, by weight or by volume, it's just going to take forever. So you're going to want to get used to just kind of eyeballing your catalyst and knowing, what percentages you're putting in just by experience. So there we go. Kind of like a raspberry color. So I'm just going to drop this into the piping bag. Come on. I hate wasting material, so I'll try to get as much out of this bag as I can. All right. So we got it mixed up. Just pull this out. Try to move the putty down. Usually I fill this bag up when I'm doing a mold, or there's like 2 or 3 times more. So you are going to waste a little bit inside the bag, but if you just pull it down, there's not a ton of waste. And then I'm just going to pinch it off, push it to the tip, cut a little piece in it. Now we're just going to put it around this radius here. I mean, you want to put enough to create a ramp, but you don't want to put too much. For doing this, I mean, you can mix up just like a base grade resin, with some silica. The problem is the cheaper resins that you get, they're going to shrink more, and also they'll become more brittle when they're by themselves. The higher grade resins like the iso and the vinyl ester work better for for this sort of thing. So I definitely mixed up way too much. I'm just going to put a little bit more. All right, that's good. Maybe some over here. So we're not trying to like jam it into the radius right now. When we put the glass on and we use a chip brush, it's going to smush it into, excuse me, into the radius, and that putty's going to fill up that radius. So right now I'm just doing the skin layer, and once I do the skin layer, then I'm going to walk away from it for a little bit. I'm going to let the skin layer tack up. The reason we want to do that is because we want the skin layer to go down. We're going to spend a little bit of time getting all the air pockets out, and then we're going to let the resin not cure, but just start to semi-cure, so that when we go to put our next layers on, and we're putting the next couple layers of glass on, this doesn't shift. So you don't want the glass underneath to shift, and then you create air pockets underneath your second layer, and you won't really be able to see it too well. I mean, you should be able to see through a couple layers of chop strand, but you might get the little tiny air pockets if you kind of pull this piece out of the mold. So by letting it cure, it's going to secure itself in place, and then we don't have to worry about it sliding around. So I'm going to mix this up kind of hot because I need to get this done for today. So I needed to move this project along pretty quick. So with the red dye MEKP, I can kind of tell, how hot it is that I have it mixed. And you really don't want to go over 3% ever. But if you do, it's not a big deal. It's just going to get hotter. Depends on, this climate that you're working in. I mean, I usually mix below 2% just because I'm working in Florida and it's so hot. If you mix at 2%, sometimes in the middle of summer, it's just going to cure so fast. And I swear, every time I start to record something, the air compressor kicks on. Or somebody comes in here, customer, and then the air compressor kicks on. All right, so the resin's mixed up. Just going to put a little bit on here. You don't really have to do this. You could just lay the chop strand over it, because 3/4 ounce chop strand dissolves so quickly that you really don't have to pre-wet the surface. I'm going to put this bigger one down first. Doesn't really matter. I didn't cut it like that on purpose. But we're just going to get it wet. Before we start to push it down, we just want to wet it out and let the styrene binder that's in the chop strand mat, we want that to start to dissolve before we start pushing it around. Because if we start pushing it around too soon, you're just going to struggle with trying to get it to follow the shape that you want, because you're trying to move around glass that's not flexible. With the styrene binder, it's going to hold the shape of this piece of fiberglass. So you just want to be patient and let the resin do its thing, let it dissolve the binder, and then it'll be a lot more pliable for you to move around and to move it into place. So you can see I'm not forcing it. I'm just really trying to push it down over that putty, work out any of the air bubbles. It's easy to work out air bubbles in chop strand mat, especially 3/4 ounce chop strand mat. But you can see, I mean, it's hard to see on camera. I'm going to grab the camera off. Reposition this here. So you can get a better look. You can see I got some air pockets right there that forming. So we're just gonna try to push this down, and we're just gonna try to work the air pockets from the inside to the outside. Usually, because a 3/4 ounce chop strand is pretty thin, you don't have to work it from inside to out. It'll just lay down on its own. As you can see, I'm still getting air bubbles popping up around the edge. Right there, another one popped up. But looking pretty good. You can see how that putty helped make this a lot easier. If I didn't have that putty on there, what's going to happen is as this piece comes up and it has to do that transition to the top, you're going to get air pockets like right here on this edge, and it's going to be hard to get it to lay down. And still, I'm still getting air pockets. There's a little one right there. These little tiny air bubbles. So that's good. Now you could just do one coat of 3/4 ounce chop strand mat and leave it, but I'm going to put another layer on here. So same thing, we're just going to coat the surface, let the styrene dissolve, let the binder dissolve. So 1708 biax is a little bit different than chop strand. 1708 biax doesn't have a styrene binder in it. It's held together. The chop strand mat is held together with stitching, so it's sewn together. So with 1708, once you wet it out and put it on your part, you can pretty much start to move it into place immediately because you don't have to wait for that styrene binder to dissolve. Now, the reason you typically always use a 3/4 ounce chop strand mat for the skin layer is because it's a lot easier to wet out and it's going to conform a lot easier. It's so thin that it dissolves the binder real quick, or the resin dissolves the binder real quick. And it makes it a lot easier to get it into place. So I'm not going to roll this out. I'm not going to get a thin roller. It's not necessary here. I can see very clearly all the pockets or any of the imperfections. Just kind of taking the excess off the surface. We just don't want to have excess resin in our lamination if we can help it. All right, so that's looking good. A little something going on there. I don't know what that is. Just gonna push this down a little bit more just to make sure that putty's squished into that radius nice. All right, that's it. So now I'm gonna walk away from this for maybe like 20 minutes, let it tack up, then I'm gonna cut some more pieces. I'm probably just gonna go right to 1708, put probably 3 layers of 1708 on this, and that should be enough. I'm just going to clean this cup out so I can use it again. And let's see, just get a little closer look. So you can see there's no real visual air pockets. If there was, you would see it easily. No need to use a roller on this. So we'll be back in a minute and we'll do the last couple coats. So I let this sit a little bit longer than I would have liked to because the battery on my microphone died, so I had to charge it. and I also got kind of sidetracked with some phone calls and things. So this is probably set for close to an hour. So it's still tacky, but I just took some 80 grit sandpaper and ran it over the surface a little bit just to make sure. So that's why you want to try to move through this project without letting the resin fully cure. But that's just me being a little bit picky. I mean, for this resin sitting here for like an hour, you should be, it should be more than safe to put the next couple layers on. So I have 3 pieces of 1708 pre-cut. I'll have my resin in my cup. I'm probably gonna need a little bit more resin than this, but I figure there's probably like maybe 12, 16 ounces in there. So just gonna mix this up real quick. I'm not gonna go as hot on this layer because I'm gonna put 3 layers of 1708, so that's gonna be a decent amount of resin and glass. You don't wanna get your part too hot. The same way with the Gelcoat. So if you start to pile on a bunch of resin, resin and layers, what's going to happen is the heat is going to start to build up in the layers. It's going to get really, really hot, and you might also get some hot burn spots in your part, which you want to avoid that. But also, too much heat is going to make it pre-release, and when you pop this off, your part could be warped. So we want to avoid that. I think to play it safe, you know, I have a lot of experience with this resin and this stuff. I know I can safely put on 3 layers. Probably what I'm going to do is after I lay this on, I'm going to bring it in and put it in my room where the air conditioning's running, just to slow down the cure initially, and then I'll bring it back out of the room. And then, you know, being out here in the shop, it's probably about 80 degrees today, then it's going to fully cure. So the resin that you use is going to affect that significantly. And a lot of people tend to use a boatyard grade resin. I used to use boatyard grade resin to build my parts, but I quickly learned that that was a mistake because boatyard grade resin is, most of it is, it's a blend of all different kinds of resins. So in the factory, when they do a run of ISO, or they do a run of a DCPD, or they do a run of Boatyard or vinyl ester, whatever's left in the bottom of the manufacturing process, they just dump it all into one barrel. So that's what you get in Boatyard resin. You get something that's a blend of vinyl ester, all those. So you really don't know what you're going to get. So from one batch to the next, you could get a batch where it has a large, you know, concentration of one type of resin. So you'll use it, and you'll say, okay, well, I know it's going to gel in this amount of time, in this temperature, et cetera, but your next batch may be completely different. And I found that the blend resins get really, really, really hot really fast. So I never, ever use boatyard grade resin. There's not a huge difference in price savings between a boatyard and something that's a little bit higher grade. Something that's 100%, ISO, 100% vinyl, things like that. So I'm just going to mix this up. So now that we have these 2 layers of 3/4 ounce on here and they're cured and there's no air pockets, we don't really have to worry too much about getting air pockets. I mean, you're going to see big air pockets. So I'm not even going to really roll this out either. We'll see. I might grab my roller and roll it out real quick. But on a small part like this, it's just really not necessary in most cases. And because we have a nice base layer down, this 1.5 ounce layer is going to create a nice base. So even if we get a little air pocket under this, it's not really going to cause an issue with it down the road. Now when I say air pockets, I mean the tiny, tiny ones. If we have like a big flap or overlap, yeah, that could be a problem. So obviously we want to avoid that, but we're not going to do sloppy work like that. So I think the camera is a little far away. Let me see. Let me move it closer. All right, hopefully that's a little bit better. So I'm just going to wet this out real quick. Just put a little bit down, and then I'm going to wet the bottom side first. Now you want to wet the bottom side of your chop strand mat first, because if you don't, what's going to happen, I mean, I could have put a lot more on my piece and then laid it down. The problem with that is if you don't have enough resin to saturate the chop strand mat, then what you're going to have to push your resin through. So chop strand mat has the top side, this is the shiny side, this side should always go up, and then a chop strand mat side should always go down. This is your binder layer. If you didn't have the chop strand mat in between layers of 1708, this biaxial, so they do make 1700 that doesn't have this on it, and that's designed for epoxy. But if you were to use 1700 and layer a bunch of these on top of one another, you're going to get poor adhesion between the layers. So what will happen is if you don't wet out the bottom of your chop strand mat, now you're going to have to put it on the top and push it through the top layer of the biaxial in order to soak the chop strand mat on the bottom, and that's just going to take a lot more time and work and effort and resin. So we're going to wet out the bottom. And if you're doing stringers or something like that, usually what I'll do is I'll have a table set up and I'll wet these out on a table first and then carry them into the boat and put them into the boat. So now we're just going to flip this over. Now you can see it's already pretty much wet out. I don't even really need to add any more resin here. So I'm just going to work it from the inside out, trying to get these bubbles from the center, and then work them out to the edge. So this is super simple stuff here. Not really rocket science. Maybe you'll pick up a couple tips in my boring commentary. All right, so that's good. I'm just going to put a little bit extra over the top of it because we don't want the second and the third layer to pull the resin out of the bottom layer. So then we're just going to wet out the bottom. You want to make sure that you have enough resin in your lamination, but not too much. If you have too much resin, then the ratio between the glass or between the resin and the glass becomes too high and you'll get a brittle laminate. I see a lot of people like squeegee out their 1708 to remove the excess. I never really do that. You want to just be careful to not pull too much resin out because the layers below it or above it, if there's not enough resin in that layer, then it's going to pull the resin out and soak it up like a sponge. So you'll end up getting a dry laminate. So you see in a lot of boats, if you're cutting them apart and the glass looks dry, it's because one of the layers that they put on was dry and it just pulled the glass out of the layer on the top. Or the layer on the top pulled the resin from the glass on the bottom, and then you end up with dry spots in your laminate. So that's where your roller is going to come in handy too, because the roller is going to just kind of pull out just enough. So this is coming out really good. I don't see any air pockets. So the reason I'm doing 3 layers of 1708 here, because that's pretty much the rule of thumb to have enough glass for a screw retention. So if you're putting a screw into raw fiberglass, typically about 3 layers of 1708 is good to hold a screw. And the piece that we're making this for has screws. So there's going to be screws holding this drain piece into the deck. So we want to make sure there's enough glass there for the screws to bite into. almost done here with this. Almost done, and again I mixed up too much resin. I hate wasting resin. I'm just going to pull off some of this excess on the edge. See, there's an air pocket right here. I don't know if you can see it. So there's an air pocket here, 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 here. So we just want to try to get these out. So the nice thing with 1708 is you can brush it over this use your chip brush and brush over the surface to walk out air pockets. It's hard to do that with chop strand mat because if you pull with your brush on chop strand mat, it might just like pull all the fibers apart and make a mess. I mean, you can do it lightly, but I really don't pull my chip brush on chop strand like that. With the 1708, because you got the biax material on the top, the brush will slide over it easily. All right, so something I forgot to cut is a piece of peel ply. I'm just going to cut a little piece of peel ply here off camera. I need to get different scissors. Now you might be wondering why I'm putting peel ply on this, and it's good to wonder. It's not really necessary, but I'll explain here in a second a couple advantages to doing that. So I'm just going to put a little bit of extra resin on the top. Now the peel ply is going to do a couple things here, a couple that don't really matter for this project. But the one thing it's going to do is it's going to pull any of the excess resin off the surface. Because peel ply is porous, so you'll see here that it's coming through to the top. So we're pushing it down into the glass, and then any of the excess resin comes through to the top. And then what that's going to do is it's going to flatten out the resin underneath, for one. For two, it's going to pull off any excess resin in the laminate. And the reason why I want it to be smooth on the bottom is so that I don't have to sand it after I remove this from the mold, because you don't want to have this sharp fiberglass shards sticking up, any loose pieces that might catch your finger, things like that. So if this was, you know, the front, this is going to be the back side of the piece. Obviously this is going to be underneath the deck. So cosmetically we're not going to do anything to this. But if we were, the peel ply is also going to seal the surface and make this laminating resin dry 100%. So if we did need to sand this, we could sand it with sandpaper and it's not going to gum up the surface. The peel ply is going to completely dry the surface. If we were going to be painting this surface, the peel ply has got texture in it, and the peel ply would leave texture in the surface, so that if, say, we wanted to put Gelcoat over the top of this, because the peel ply left the texture, we don't have to sand it. The texture left behind by the peel ply is going to kind of simulate sand scratch marks, and the Gelcoat will stick right to this, so it skips a whole step of sanding. All right, so I went and did another project. So this has probably been sitting here for about an hour and a half, and it's not warm, so it's fully cured. So we're going to pull the peel ply off and then try to pop this part off. So you can see on this side is the excess resin. On that side is just clean release fabric. And just give you a close-up look of what it looks like, so you can see how nice and smooth the peel ply makes this piece. I mean, for a couple of cents, it's worth putting it on there. So the tricky part might be getting my, so I got these plastic mold release wedges. Man, they're in rough shape. Sometimes I sand the edge down, just make the edge sharper as they get banged up. But I'm just going to use this screwdriver to kind of get it under the edge to get it started. There we go. And then I'm going to put the plastic wedge in that little gap. And just make sure you're completely underneath the laminate, because you don't want to put your wedge in between layers of glass. Sometimes that can happen, and then you're splitting your laminate apart. All right, looks like it's pretty much released. Well, that's good. Sometimes when you make these acrylic molds, the bond between these two pieces isn't strong enough to survive, but it looks like the epoxy stuck on there really, really well. So I'll be able to use this mold again. And it looks like the part came out damn near perfect, and it's super smooth, super glossy. Let me clean this fillet wax off. So just use a plastic spreader to clean off the fillet wax, the modeling clay, whatever you want to call it. That looks really good. It's a little simple part. It's going to help this drain function a lot better. So let me grab the drain, and you can kind of see. So here's the drain piece. I still need to cut the inside out so this can drop down through. But you see how now, get closer to the camera. Let's see. So you can see how having that little recess is going to make sure that all the water goes down into. It's probably a little bit higher. It's probably pretty close to flush with that. But once the hole is cut and this drops down flat, it's going to be a nice little piece, accent piece. But just, it's kind of hard to see, but I mean, you can see that how nice the finish is. You can see that reflection off the gel coat. So whoever does the install, if they're really careful with installing it, they shouldn't have to do much prep at all to it. I'm not sure what color the boat is, but I highly doubt it's close to this color. But all right, that's a wrap on this video. Hope you guys learned something real quick, a couple tips, techniques, ways to make molds really, really fast. And you know, when you're doing a restoration, having little, finishing pieces like this, helps take your project from just being mediocre to being something that's a little bit more nice, a little nicer, and closer to an OEM boat. So appreciate you guys watching, and see you in the next one. Stop recording. GoPro, stop recording.